Okay, so since all of you are in this class, I assume you have some kind of value for history. That's why you took this, and I'm very happy for that. Uh, why should we study it at all? I'll hear in the lexicon of public discourse, which is so uh, demoralizing these days. But a lot of people say, why do I need to know any of this? Like, how is it relevant to me? This isn't something that's going to get me a job and whatever. And it was never really about that. It's about understanding the world. You'll probably have to use the skill of analyzing change over time, which is what history is. I mean, it's the study of the past. So you've probably heard something like this of why we should study it. I don't even like this quote because it's really not very accurate. And I went over this in the other intro slides that you probably saw, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. But the quote I like much better is that the past is never dead, it's not even past. And this is true in a lot of contexts. And you want to understand how to analyze history in order to understand how to analyze any kind of chunk of time in the past that's relevant to your present, which might be any number of things in your personal life, in your working life, or in the events that occur around you at a local, regional, or national or worldwide level. I mean, we're going through all kinds of events simultaneously in 2020. It's almost too much for us uh, to comprehend. So I think that's why we should study it. It's not dead. It's not even past. Other reasons, it should develop your various liberal arts skills, but where I think history is more useful than some other subjects that develop these skills, like, say, literature, not to insult my literature colleagues, I certainly love literature myself and think it's a very important subject for understanding the human condition. But where history comes into play is that history actually happened. It's truth and it's not fake. It's not made up. It's not theory. Obviously, there are theories in history, but the facts of history happened. And so, what we talk about in this class or any history class is that this is what humans went through in their lived reality in the past. And I think that's more important to analyze than various theoretical information. Watch I now, my colleagues in other disciplines get upset at me for saying that. It also gives you an historical sense, I think, a sense of being able to put things into context in an intelligent way. That's a very important skill that I think is useful for your life in general. So I study Native American history in particular. My argument is that the history of Native Americans not only correlates with American history, it's integral to American history. It's part of the story. The indigenous people of North America are part of what made America what it is. If you just look around us, I mean, right now I'm in my office sitting in a building called Modoc Hall. I mean, that's a Native American name, and a lot of things just all around us are Native American names. So understanding Native American history is kind of integral to what America is, even if we don't like to admit that. So if you want to understand anything about the place in which you live, which is the U.S., or understand the U.S. in general, understanding its indigenous people and how they developed and what impacts they had on what became the United States, I think are extremely important. Also, we're going to use this class to dispel some popularized myths. And I usually do this in class. We can't do this online. But if you think about what the borders were of the United States in 1800, and I'm going to talk about this concept several times throughout the class, the colonization of the maps. So here's a blank picture of North America with some of the river systems. we look at this and we know what the borders are of the U.S. because we recognize where some of these rivers are the border. So, here's, let's see, I've got a laser pointer thing on here. Ooh, how cool is that? Here's the Columbia River, so you can see the northern border of Oregon there. Here's the Rio Grande River, so you can see Texas there. Here's the Mississippi River, and so there's the western border of Illinois. So we recognize some of these things, and because we have a colonized view of the map, and it's because we've been shown the pictures so many times. So when I ask students in your book, in the first chapter talks about this, how she always asks students to draw what the borders were of the U.S. in 1800. So, and most people will draw the border somewhere around here. And that makes sense. Here's the James River, some of the original Virginia settlements were over here. Here's the Hudson River. So, right there. It makes sense to draw the border somewhere in the eastern seaboard here, because America, from just your general history growing up, America grew from east to west. The thing is, in 1800, and most people will draw the border here, the more accurate expression of where the border was, so here's probably what you're thinking of, distribution of population 1800. This is somewhat colonized, because it shows like all of this being part of what the U.S. became, various territories, but they really weren't at that time. Most of this was Indian country. And so a more accurate, even a somewhat more accurate view of, a somewhat less inaccurate view of what the United States was in 1800 is seen in this census map here, but even this doesn't tell the whole story. In reality, in 1800, the vast majority of North America was, let me use this term, it was Indian country. It was occupied by Native Americans. They controlled it. What was the United States? What the United States actually controlled were a few pockets of population that hugged the seaboard. And so it was a process by which the map was drawn, and it wasn't at all clear. And we're going to see this really until the mid-19th century, not that long ago. Like, my great-great-grandfather lived in this time. Up until the mid-19th century, mid-1800s, it was not at all clear the continent was going to be controlled by the United States. And that's something to keep in mind, that up until about 1840, 50 something, a lot of people from any part of the world would have said, yeah, North America is most of the space is under the control of their indigenous people, not under the control of what became the United States. And so that's one of the myths I like to dispel, is that the United States was just inevitably what it is. It most certainly was not.